Hello and God bless you. My name is Randy Jones. I'm an elder of the United Methodist Church. I currently pastor Griffin Chapel United Methodist Church here in Starkville. We will be doing a study over the book of Nehemiah. I love this book by Joseph Daniels. It is Walking with Nehemiah. Your community is your congregation. So we will be doing a study over that over the next few sessions. So we are starting this series with the book of Nehemiah, dealing with the first chapter. I love this particular book because it deals with rebuilding. At Griffin Chapel, our theme for the year is the year to rebuild 2.0. Last year, our theme was the year to rebuild. And we focus on rebuilding our leadership and everything that was going on. And even after COVID, a lot of us are rebuilding our ministries and finding ways to grow. And this book was amazing to do a study on. I did a ministry in context when I was my first few years. A few ministers went to Atlanta, Georgia, a pastor's leadership conference, convocation. And Pastor Joseph Daniels gave us this book where he talked about your community is your congregation, walking with Nehemiah. So we're going to start off on this first chapter, this first step where it is feel your heart break, okay? This first chapter talks about your heart breaking, about what is going on. So this was Nehemiah's prayer. I'm reading from the NIV version of the Bible. We're going to focus in only on Nehemiah 1 through 4. I'm reading from the NIV version of the Bible, and it reads, the words of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah, in the month of Kislev, in the 20th year, while I was in the citadel of Susa, Hananiah, one of the brothers, came from Judah with some other men. And I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that had survived the exile, and also about Jerusalem. They said to me, those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and the gates have been burnt with fire. When I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. Then I said, Lord, the God of heaven, the great and awesome God, who keeps his covenant of love with those who loved him and keep his commandments. So I'm focusing. I read the 5th verse, but I'm focusing on the 1st through the 4th verse, feeling your heartbreak. Nehemiah gets the word that the land that he grew up in, the walls had been torn down. And he's sad about what is going on. And many of us can relate to what that feels like when trials and tribulations happen. I remember during the pandemic, I got the news that my grandmother had cancer. My heart truly broke. I even found myself getting up and going over to the church, and I was crying tremendously with no one in there. And I got on the highway to drive to go and check on her, realizing that during the pandemic, no one could get into the hospital to even get in the room with her. So my heart was breaking. And many of us can kind of look at situations that have happened in our own personal lives where things have happened. I love the quote that by Dr. King. It says that we shall overcome because of the arc of the moral universes is long, but it bends towards justice. Things happen all around us while we feeling sad. Can you imagine what that is like for Nehemiah, where he is sad, he is discouraged with everything that is going on? You may be able to look at your own personal life. Joseph Daniels talk about in his book, and I love this quote. It says that my heart breaks over the church, in particular, churches that are so self-centered and disconnected from what is really happening in people's lives and communities, that they were completely out of touch, blind and ignorant to the power of Jesus to resurrect broken lives, situations, and neighborhoods. I told this story about what I heard about long ago, where these men were in a barbershop. And while they were in the barbershop, they were discussing what they could do for the youth. And they are having discussions back and forth, back and forth. And then this question was asked to this preacher, what is something we can do for the youth? And this preacher said, why don't you ask the young person that's sitting right there in a chair? And so many times we are wanting to do things without connecting with those that are in the community. So what are the heartbreaking moments to the people that's happening right outside of your doors? We sometimes get so locked in what's going on in the trials and tribulations in our own churches. And yes, those can be rough times. But what is happening in the lives of the people that are right outside of your door? The Bible tells us that the man was begging on the steps of the temple. So what happens when people are coming to your steps? And the church is so wrapped up in its own inside thing that they miss on the issues that are going on outside. And not only the issues that are going on outside, but the issues that are going on in the pews. I love this. It says that that we were seeking to find meaning in our lives, yet our churches, after our phenomenal youth leader departed, that we missed a step in working with our people within our doors. So what do your heart break? So Nehemiah gets this word about what's going on later on in the chapters, and we're going to deal with this over the next few weeks. We're going to try to deal with how his heart breaks and what he does in that moment. But my question is, what do you do with bad news? I'm reminded of this movie, The Wiz. It's a different version from The Wizard of Oz, but it's the same version, but a different take in it. And one of the songs that came in there, it was "Don't Bring Me No Bad News." What happens? What do you do with bad news that happen around you? When you're on your job, when you're with your family, when you are with your friends, do you instantly go into prayer? Do you instantly panic? Do you instantly cry? Do you instantly get into a defense mode? The Bible tells us that the leader gets the word that he is going to die. And the Bible says he turned his face to the wall and he prays to God, please remember me. And the prophet turns around and says, I'm going to add you more years. So what do you do when things come up against you? And not only when things come up against you, but who is feeding you this news? My grandmother used to always say, be careful of those that are whispering in your ears, because the people around you cannot have the right intentions. So this is important because it's dealing with having your heart break. So what do you do with this concept. In the first chapter, Nehemiah is struggling. He's struggling after getting bad news. And in this place of the church that we're in, I've been a pastor now for 9 years. I can't tell you how many times I've received bad news. I received bad news just before going into the pulpit. Different meetings and different struggles people are dealing with. And I'm having to smile and try to encourage others around me while I'm dealing with my own issues or I'm dealing with someone else's struggles. So how do you deal with bad news? I was at my very first appointment, and while I'm pastoring around 2015 or 2016, I'm pastoring, a man in the back of the church passed out from the weather that was going on in the church. It was extremely hot in the church and had to get everyone back focused on what was going on. I remember being in church one time, and while I was in the pulpit, someone brought me news that a member church had burnt down while we were in worship. How do you handle life's rough moments? And many of us have had to struggle with trials and tribulations and being a part of the United Methodist Church, as our bishop called it, the dreaded D word. There's so much that occurs, and you still have to do what God has called us to do. And the reality is that many of you are survivors. You've had to deal with bad news. You've had to keep on pushing despite what is going on around you. I remember this sermon illustration that was given about this man that was driving his car. And as he's driving his car, the rain started to pour down. Rain started to pour down. He called his father and he said, "Father, the rain is coming down extremely hard. What should I do?" The father said, "Keep on driving." He says, "The water is getting almost to the top of my car, to the point I cannot even see over my roof." He said, "Keep on driving." He said, "Everybody else is pulled over to the side. What should I do?" He said, "Just keep on driving." He gets to the other side and the rain stops. And the sun is shining. He said, "Son, put your car in park. I want to show you something." He said, "The people that stopped while the rain was going on, they're still there in the storm. But because you kept pushing to the other side, you have made it past the storm. Be not dismayed, for whatever betide, God will take care of you." So Nehemiah, I love this. I love this because in the book that Joseph Daniels put together with Walking with Nehemiah, he asked this question, that how many of us are not doing what we want to do or what God has called us to do because we are comfortable. And he responds with this: comfort is not about how much money you make or how big your house is or what kind of car you drive. Comfort is about being satisfied with the status quo, even when you know God is calling you to change it. So the question is, what is God calling for the church to do? When everything that's going on, when people are leaving the church, when people are staying to themselves, people are isolated, what is the church called to do? And the church is called to love people. The church is called to encourage people. The church is called to be there for people in those rough moments. And the church has a responsibility to be there for people, even in those dark times. So Nehemiah is the perfect example of what it's like to deal with bad news. Many of us have had those moments where we've had bad news and we had to keep on pressing despite what's going on. You may be watching this right now and you are trying to figure out how I'm going to deal with these situations that are around me. How am I going to deal with this child that is struggling with their identity as a human being? How am I going to deal with this job that I don't like? How am I going to deal with the issues that are going on in my local church and my local community? And I love the songwriter, the hymn writer says, life is filled with swift transition. Gnawed on earth, unmoved can stand. Build your hopes on things eternal. Hold to God's unchanging hand. That's my thesis for today, is that for you to hold on to God's unchanging hand. People may change on you, but God is not going to change on you. You have to hold to God's unchanging hand. When you get good news, when you get bad news, when you are discouraged, when your head is hanging down, hold to God's unchanging hand. And yes, sometimes your heart will break and you will be dismayed because of everything that's going on. But I need you to hold to God's unchanging hand. Listen, say this with me. I'm holding, preacher. I'm holding. I'm not going to let go. I'm reminded at the woman with the issue of blood. The Bible tells us that she couldn't touch Jesus, but she touched something that was touching Jesus. And she held on until everything in her body was made whole. And that's how we are supposed to do. That despite the bad news that we get, despite if someone calls you today with some negativity, despite what happens on your job, what happens in your marriage, what happens around you, for you to have a faith that you will stay strong in. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. So continue to be encouraged that Nehemiah gets the bad news. And later on in the text, he finds ways to handle that. But in this particular beginning of the text, he gets this bad news from those around him, gets the bad report of the wall coming down, and everything is torn down. The reality is that all of us will have times where we're going to have trials and tribulations. We're going to have times where things may look rough and we are discouraged. But we have to keep our faith in God. Okay? Here's one of the things that was written in the book. I love this book. I love this book. And if you have an opportunity, please get this book. It is Walking with Nehemiah. Your community is your congregation by Joseph Daniels. He writes this. It says, God used Nehemiah's own brother, Hananiah, to get Nehemiah's attention. It must really be something when your own family members come to you with a message from God that unexpectedly hits you right between your eyes and shattered you at the depth of your soul. And the truth be told, sometimes God will use your own family. God will use your friends. God will use the people closest to you to get your attention. Can you be honest for just a moment? There are times when you need God to get your attention. There are times when you need God to find ways to get your attention. It's amazing. It's amazing how God will use those around you. I heard this sermon illustration that was perfect about getting your attention. This man was driving this brand new car. He was headed to homecoming. He wanted everyone to see his car. And as he is driving this brand new car, he gets closer to the campus, so he turned his music up so everyone can see his car. And a young boy throws a brick through his window. He puts his car in park, jumps out of the car, grabs the young man around his collar and says to this young man, "How dare you throw a brick at my car? My car costs more than your life. I have more degrees than you can even imagine or even afford. My job is something that you can't even think about. It can never happen to you. Why would you throw a brick at my car?" And he said that my brother fell out of his wheelchair. And the only how I can get your attention is by throwing a brick at you. The man had tears in his eyes, and he helped this young man get back into the wheelchair. And he realized sometimes God throws a brick at you in order to get your attention. I heard something years ago that said that if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. And the reality is that sometimes God has to get your attention with bad news. God has to find a way to restructure you in order for you to put your focus back on God. God uses Nehemiah's own brother to get his attention in order to do what he has called for him to do. Nehemiah, the Bible tells us that he weeps for days. Don't let anyone tell you that life will not make you cry sometimes. Life sometimes will make you want to go into a ball and just have a good cry. Sometimes you got to release those things because we are all having rough moments. We're all having times where we're wanting to throw in the towel. And we have times where we want to weep and give up. But I love the hymn, and I said it before, be not dismayed. For whatever betide, God will take care of you. And I want you to know that God will take care of you. Beneath his wings with love abide. God will take care of you. Yes, my brother, my sister, there are times where you will get discouraged. Yes, my brother, my sister, there are times where you want to throw in the towel, but don't give up. Keep the faith. Please don't give up. It's rough. And Nehemiah is that perfect example of what it's like to get bad news, to weep. But I want you to know that I believe that he still trusted in God. Because later on in the text, the Bible says he calls out to God. I love the songwriter says, "I will trust in the Lord until I die." So I want us to continue to trust in God, that despite what is going on around us, that we need to keep the faith. It might seem rough, and I'm being honest with you. There are times in life it is rough. It is rough to be positive when negativity is all around you. Take a moment to weep. Take a moment, but don't stay in there. Don't continue to lower your head. Trust in God and know that God will make a way for you. We're going to deal with this over these next few weeks, and I pray that you are encouraged to know that bad news may come, but bad news won't always stay that way. Songwriter says it won't always be this way. So I want you to know that sooner or later, it's going to turn in your favor. It's turning around for you. Just trust God and see that God will make a way. I want to encourage you to keep the faith. Don't give up. Don't throw in the towel. It's going to happen. Just trust God.